Sir, you'll need to wait until everyone else has deplaned. That's what the flight attendant said to the elderly man in seat 24A, worn cap, small carry-on, eyes that had seen decades pass. He didn't argue, just nodded and waited. But after the last passenger stepped off, the cockpit opened, and the pilot didn't walk out with luggage. He walked out and saluted. If that stopped you cold, comment. Respect for those who never asked to be seen but were never forgotten. The boarding process was nearly complete when he appeared at the gate, stooped slightly at the shoulders, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who had nowhere particular to be, but had been to places most couldn't imagine. The gate agent glanced at his boarding pass, then at his weathered face. Seat 24A. Sir, we're almost finished boarding. He nodded, adjusting the faded blue cap on his head. It read simply, USAF retired. The embroidery had begun to fray at the edges, like whispered stories too often told. The jetway seemed longer for him, each step measured, unhurried, every footfall the echo of years. When he finally reached the aircraft door, the flight attendant offered a practiced smile. Can I help you with your bag, sir? No, thank you. I can manage. His voice was quiet but firm. Not weak, just economical with words. He made his way down the narrow aisle, past passengers already settled with headphones in place and screens lit. Some glanced up briefly. Most didn't notice him at all. The invisible passage of history in human form. When he reached 24A, he carefully stowed his small carry-on beneath the seat in front of him. No overhead bin necessary. Everything he needed fit in a space smaller than a briefcase. The middle-aged woman in 24B looked up briefly from her magazine. Hello, she said. Ma'am. He nodded politely, then turned to the window. His reflection gazed back. Creased skin mapped with lines earned through years that had stretched into decades. The plane pushed back. Safety demonstrations played. He watched without watching, having heard it all before on countless flights to places marked on maps others would never see. A child, perhaps 6 or 7, peered over the seat 2 rows ahead, wide eyes, curious. Mommy, he's so old, the child stage whispered. Shh, honey, that's not polite, the mother said, offering an apologetic smile. The man in 24A didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he'd heard such things too often to care. His eyes remained fixed on the runway as the plane accelerated, wheels lifting from the ground with the familiar sensation of weight surrendering to air. Once they reached cruising altitude, a young flight attendant stopped at his row. Would you like anything to drink, sir? Just water. No ice. Simple requirements. Nothing fancy. She returned moments later with his water. He sipped it slowly, methodically. No movies played on the screen in front of him. No music filled his ears through headphones. Just silence and the hum of engines. Hours passed. While others slept or worked or entertained themselves, he remained still. Occasionally, his fingers would tap a rhythm on the armrest. Perhaps a memory of another time. Another place, another aircraft, but mostly, he was stillness personified. When the captain announced their descent, the man straightened slightly in his seat, adjusting his cap. The first sign of anticipation he'd shown the entire flight. As the wheels touched down with a gentle bump, the usual announcements began. Seat belts, gate information, weather. And before anyone could stand, the flight attendant returned to his row. Sir, she said quietly, you'll need to wait until everyone has exited. Airline policy. He nodded once. Of course. The familiar chaos of deplaning began. Overhead bins snapped open. Passengers stood too early, hunched beneath the low ceiling. The rush to exit, despite having nowhere urgent to go. Through it all, the man in 24A remained seated, patient. His hands rested on his knees, weathered and spotted with age, yet somehow strong. Hands that had done things, built things, perhaps destroyed things. A young man in his 30s, retrieving his bag from the overhead, glanced down. His eyes caught something on the old man's jacket, a patch, partially visible beneath the fold of the fabric. Not the familiar emblems seen on Veterans Day parades, but something different, something classified. The young man hesitated, as if wanting to say something. Their eyes met briefly. The old man's gaze wasn't unfriendly, but it contained a depth that made casual conversation impossible. So the young man nodded instead, a gesture of respect, without understanding what he was respecting, and moved on. Row by row, the plane emptied, the business travelers eager to make connections, the vacationers stretching after hours of confinement, the college students with their oversized backpacks, all flowing past 24A like a river around an unmovable stone. Inside the cockpit, Captain James Whitaker reviewed his post-flight checklist. 27 years of flying, and he still completed each item methodically. Safety wasn't something you outgrew. "Everything good?" First Officer Rodriguez asked, gathering his belongings. Captain Whitaker didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the passenger manifest on his tablet. A name had caught his attention, something familiar. A ghost from conversations long past, his father's voice speaking across decades. "James," Rodriguez prompted. "Cover final checks?" "I'll be a minute." Whitaker's voice was different now. The professional pilot gone, replaced by something older, personal. Rodriguez nodded, sensing this wasn't the time for questions. The final passenger stepped through the forward door. The flight attendant Sarah confirmed the count. "All passengers deplaned, except for the elderly gentleman in 24A. He's waiting as requested." She closed the forward door, signaling to ground crew that deplaning was complete. The plane fell silent. That peculiar emptiness that follows a full cabin. The gentle hum of auxiliary power, the occasional creak of cooling metal, and the quiet breathing of the man in 24A. He hadn't moved, hadn't checked his watch, hadn't shown the slightest impatience. As if waiting was something he'd mastered long ago in places where impatience could get you killed. Inside the cockpit, Captain Whitaker stood slowly. He removed his hat and placed it carefully on his seat. His hand smoothed his uniform jacket, an unconscious gesture, as if preparing for inspection. He stared at the closed cockpit door for a long moment. "Matthew," he whispered to himself. "Colonel Robert Matthews." The name wasn't just letters on a manifest anymore, it was a story, a legend, told over whiskey on rare occasions when his father spoke of Vietnam, of a man who flew through storms of enemy fire to extract wounded soldiers, who returned for the fallen when others wouldn't risk it. A man his father had described only once in a rare moment of openness. "The bravest man I ever knew, and he never wanted anyone to know it." Whitaker took a deep breath. It wasn't about airline courtesy now. It was about something much older, something written in a code that preceded commercial aviation, a debt that couldn't be measured in miles or minutes. He opened the cockpit door. The man in 24A looked up. His eyes were clear, alert, still sharp. Captain Whitaker stepped into the aisle and stood at attention, and then he did something no one expected. He saluted. Not a casual gesture, not a polite nod, a formal, crisp, full-sleeve salute, the kind taught at the academy, the kind rendered only to those who earned it. The old man blinked once, then, slowly, deliberately, he returned it. Two men, decades apart. One salute, no words. Captain Whitaker stepped aside. "Colonel Matthews, it would be my honor to escort you off this aircraft." The old man nodded. "Thank you, son." They walked down the empty aisle together, past empty seats, past the flight attendants who now stood with hands clasped, heads bowed. past history itself. As they stepped onto the jetway, a young ground crewman caught sight of the pilot and the elderly passenger walking side by side. He straightened instinctively, removed his cap, held it to his chest. Something unspoken passed between them. The old man nodded. Outside the terminal window, the world went on. Cars moving, people bustling, announcements echoing. But inside, for a moment, time bowed its head and let a hero pass by. It's remembered by those who know what it costs to earn it. Ironheart Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.